IVM.
There's a quick survey to fill out on ivmpodcast.com/survey. It lets us know a little bit more about who's listening to us. And you know what? We're going to do a few prizes. So, we'll do a random drawing of maybe 10 people and we'll send you all some swag. Remember, that's ivmpodcast.com/survey where you can fill out the survey.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. My name is Suman and I'm your host for today. With temperatures soaring everywhere, it's good to see at least the electoral climate cool down for a bit. We are over one round of assembly elections covering UP, Punjab, Goa, Uttarakhand, and parties will soon gear up for the next round in Gujarat and Himachal Pradesh. At this time, the Chief Election Commissioner has also made a statement which says that they are ready to try a new way of conducting elections. And we also hear a lot of, when we have all these various elections going on, we also hear a lot of chatter about how much time we spend on elections and why this hampers a lot of work. The solution proposed is simultaneous elections for the Lok Sabha and all assemblies. So what is this about? What are the pros and cons? What are the implications for Indian democracy and federalism? To discuss these issues and a lot more, I have with me Pranay. For those of you who don't know him already, among other things, he currently chairs the high-tech geopolitics program at Takshashila. Welcome to the show, Pranay.
Hi, Suman.
Hi. Interesting conversation, right?
Yeah. So, Suman, neither of us are experts in this topic. So, I thought before we go into the details of this one nation, one election, so to say, I wanted to know what are our preconceived biases about this, right? No one comes with a clean slate. So, what did you think when you saw one nation, one election? Let me begin with my views. Any idea which has one nation, one X is directly off the front foot. It is off-putting because you are trying to centralize something, say that one thing is better than you having it in a diversified or decentralized way. So whenever I see one nation, one X something, I just get put off by that. So that was my starting point to this conversation. But yes, I have read after that about really nice detailed note which is there on the Niti Aayog website by Bibek Debroy and Kishore Desai. So which actually has quite a bit of detail on how we can transition to simultaneous elections. But the biases that I had earlier, also there is another one. We always feel that why, if you have all elections together, then there is correlation between union parties or the national parties getting more votes compared to the regional parties. So that correlation exists, and that's why I think that there are too many unintended consequences for this particular action. That's where I started. What about you?
Yeah. When I heard, this was a few years ago when I heard about this, I thought, why not? It seems so efficient to do. But I realized later on, efficiency is not the only parameter that we look at when we do any kind of public policy, at least in public policy. We have other things that we need to look at too. And so as I began to read about this, like you, I have mixed feelings, almost bordering on the negative. But I too read the Niti Aayog report and a lot of other commentary around it, which negates or which counter argues against, puts counter arguments against what they are proposing. So, firstly, what does simultaneous election mean for us?
Right. Yeah. So this is an important point. Great that you started with this. So simultaneous elections can mean many different things. In the common perception, simultaneous elections might mean that you will vote only once in 5 years for all the elections that you have. So basically, you would have generally three levels of elections if you are in a city. So your municipal council, your state assembly, and your Lok Sabha, right? There are these three levels of elections. So common perception would be that by simultaneous election, it would mean that only once in 5 years would you have to vote for all three elections. But that is not what is meant by simultaneous elections in reality. At least in the Niti Aayog paper which was presented, and that is the basis of a lot of talk and discussions today. What they mean by simultaneous elections is there will be simultaneous elections held only for the Lok Sabha and the legislative assemblies at the state level. The entire local government is left out of this, because imagine, right, we have around 2.5 lakh plus local governments. So if you had to have elections in each gram sabha and each zilla parishad simultaneously with Lok Sabha and state assembly elections, we don't have that kind of capacity at all. And even the terms of the local governments vary from those of state assembly, etc. So basically in this proposal, the entire local government bit is left out. So you will have to vote for that separately, regardless of what happens on the state and the union levels. Okay, so that's kept out. Now, even within this, simultaneous elections for Lok Sabha and legislative assembly doesn't mean that all these elections will be held only once in 5 years. The way they propose is that basically there will be two phases after an initial transition period. So after every 2.5 years, you will hold elections. So there will be one phase where there will be, say, Lok Sabha elections plus some number of states, let's say around 14, 15 states. And then after 2.5 years, there will be another set of elections for the remaining states, right? And then the hope is that all this will synchronize, and then you will, instead of having these elections every year, you will have elections every 2.5 years in basically, so two phases, and they'll be spread out after every 2.5 years. So this is what is meant by simultaneous elections in the current proposal.
Yeah. Intuitively speaking, I mean, the idea is very appealing. Right? We're talking of various pluses. We're talking about cost. We're talking about, if you have to take this one at a time. First is the common belief is that having elections so regularly, we have seen that in a year, we normally have 5 to 7 state assembly elections. Okay? So this causes disruption in development projects. I mean, while administratively, regular stuff gets carried on, there are no capital projects that are done. There is no introduction of, we are not allowed to introduce new welfare schemes, etc. Having one nation, one election, or whatever, this kind of a thing, they believe will will help the government be more productive. What is your view on that? Do you think it really pans out that way?
Yeah, so again, let's discuss this, because as I said, neither of us are experts, but I find this view problematic, Suman. So let me explain why, right? So first of all, I would suggest everyone should read the discussion paper, because it is the most clear articulation of why someone should transition to simultaneous elections. So please do read that. But just to paraphrase from that, right? So in one section, they talk about they try to estimate the developmental time lost because of elections, right? And the argument is that currently approximately two states go to election in India every year. Okay, so on that basis, given that the model code of conduct is around 2 months during election to a state assembly, so what it means is that every year there are around 4 months, okay, which are lost due to these elections, right? So you can't take developmental programs, that of the state governments in that particular assembly area, and also of the union government in those states, right? So the argument put forward in the paper is that out of 1 year, one third of the time, 4 months, you can't do any developmental work, and that's why it is a problem. So this is what the paper says. Now, prima facie, if you look at it, it sounds very serious, right? Like if one third of your every year gets lost to elections, then it's definitely something to ponder over, and it's a problem. But now, if you look at it in further detail, I think this idea of one third of time getting lost might be misleading. So let me explain why. So first of all, if you look at it, the claim is that the developmental activities get solved for 4 months a year. Now, if you look at it, that's not true for the entire country, right? So let's say if elections are held in Karnataka today, okay, so maybe 2 months for Karnataka here, but during those 2 months, the entire developmental works for the remaining 28, 29 states can continue as they are, right? There are no restrictions on that. So, and then let's say Karnataka state assembly election is held after every 5 years. So, let's say the term gets completed. So, after 5 years, again, we lose 2 months of developmental time. And let's assume that for some case in between there is a Lok Sabha elections, right? So, actually, we are losing 6 months over a 60-month time period in the state of Karnataka, right? Which is 1/10 of the total time period and not 1/3 of a year, right? So 1/10 is okay. I mean, I don't think that it is such a serious thing as 1/3. So that's first point. Okay. Now, and the second more important point is probably if we are saying that the model code of conduct is really the problem here, you can actually change that, right? You can shorten the length of the moratorium. So you don't need to have 2 months. You just make it 1 month. There should be a constitutional change or whatever change is required to the Representation of People Act or etc. to change this, and it won't require you to actually bring about simultaneous elections, right? So
That's like one
yeah,
approach.
and by the way, even in the current form, the government can actually consult the election commission about the developmental works it plans. And if they are not deemed to have any electoral implications, they are allowed to continue. So it's not as if everything will stop. It's not as if metro work will stop if there are elections going on or something like that. So there are other things you can consult the election commission about. So I'm sure you can come to a new modus vivendi with the election commission about what are the kinds of things that can be allowed, what is the time period which should be allowed for this model code of conduct, etc. And the third point on this model code of conduct is that I think entirely this model code of conduct should be thrown out, because if a government wants to use developmental activities to lure its
What is
voters,
wrong with it?
yeah, what's wrong with it? They let them do that, right? And if the government is promising freebies to distort their voter choices, which is the concern, it is happening even today, right? Like just before the model code of conduct, everyone knows that money is given and booze is passed
Promise.
on to people. So it's just that we are saying because of this model code of conduct, we are able to solve a big thing. I don't see that as a problem. And if it is a problem solved for the model code of conduct, why do you need a simultaneous election? These were my 2 points. There's also a third concern I have. This developmental time lost argument is a lot like this dog ate my homework excuse, no? Because
Yeah.
what the government is saying is that, we are always brimming with ideas. We have so many things to plan. It's just that these damn elections come in the
Come
way,
in the way.
and that's why we are not able to implement our great plan. But this is quite absurd, right? I mean, we know generally elections, when they'll be done, the developmental works, how much time they will be taking, etc. This ex ante information is available
So
for
they
the
can
government.
plan.
Yeah, so they can plan it better. So just to say that, because of elections we are not going to do this, or it's a problem, it relegates elections to, it's like a begrudgingly necessary event. It's an obstacle which is blocking the grand developmental vision of a party or a leader. It appears so, but in fact we should be proud of the elections, right? Like, why is that such a big problem? So these were my three contentions. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm by and large with you. Also, when we talk of developmental projects, we are not ruling out emergency situations. So, if there is a flood or something else, nothing is stopping the government from doing what is needed at that situation. Similarly, regular administrative jobs that need to be carried out, say a midday meal scheme, say, or any other road works, like you mentioned, metro, etc. Nothing of that is getting stopped. It's only the new announcements probably that are getting stopped, and that for a 2 month thing, I don't think is an issue big time.
Yeah, and if it is an issue, reduce that 2 months to one
Two
month, right?
months to
Like,
1 month, and it is
that's all.
anyway a consensus between political parties themselves with the election commission. So that can, I mean, if everybody sits together and sort it out, it can be solved for. Moving to the next is the the cost is always something that is touted in terms. Sure, we need to get more efficient. Sure, we need to, wherever we can reduce costs, we should be able to. We should aim to reduce costs. That's not the counter or whatever. But the paper gives us some of. They say that the union government spends about 4 to 5,000 crores for the conduct of Lok Sabha elections. Now, the way the money is spent is also mentioned in the paper. It says that if it is only the Lok Sabha elections, the union government spends the money, whereas if it is the state government, the assembly elections, there is a cost sharing arrangement between them. Right? So, how do you think the cost is a factor in deciding whether we should have one election factor? Model at all.
Yeah. So again, let's look at the current simultaneous elections proposed, right? Irrespective of this implementation of the new schema, it's not as if you will just have one election for everything, right? You will still have separate elections for local governments, and for the other elections you might have 2.5 years, two phases of elections across states, right? So that cost is not going to become directly one third of what it is now. Moving on, like even here, we should look at, when we say massive expenditures by governments, we should look at who is it who is spending a lot of money, right? So there are three players involved. One is government spending elections for the conduct of it, second is the candidates themselves, and third is the political parties. Now we should look at all of these three separately. So let's first take the first component is government expenditure. Like you said, it is around 4,000 to 5,000 crores. That is a really small sum for the size of government of India, right? So in 2014, for example, that amounted to around 0.03% of India's GDP once every 5 years, right? So it's just really small sum. And if you think of state elections for a large state like Bihar, their cost is around 0.003% of India's 2014 GDP. Again, every 5 years. If we assume that all states require the same cost as Bihar, which is an overestimate, not all states are as big as Bihar, it would still amount to be 0.12% of India's 2014 GDP over a period of 5 years. Again, all state assemblies and Lok Sabha elections combined, this will be the sum. Now clearly this number is not unaffordable, right? Union total government expenditure in India is around 26% of GDP, out of which, if we say 0.12% is being spent for actually doing the process which elects these democratic governments, I don't think it is a
And
big
once in
number.
5 years.
Yeah, once in 5 years, right? So I don't think it can, like you said in the beginning, right? The primary motivation for undertaking a constitutional amendment exercise, which might possibly have unintended consequences, can't be this cost argument of 4,000 crores. That's first point. The second component of the cost is spending by candidates. Now, candidate spending is actually capped at 70 lakh for Lok Sabha and 28 lakhs for state assembly elections. But we know that it is laughably low. And in fact, a lot of people spend over and above that through illegal means, right? So that's, let's assume that, that is not going to change in any case.
Yes.
Now, the other component, which is the spending by political parties, there's no cap on that. Absolutely, there's no restriction on that. So now, if we take the total spent by political parties and the candidates, this paper claims that it amounted to approximately rupees 30,000 crores for the 2014 Lok Sabha elections. Now, this is a worrying number, right? Because this expenditure is often in the form of freebies, vote for cash exchanges, etc. But again, arguing that conducting simultaneous elections will fix this problem is in a way an admission by political parties that they will not change their ways. It's just that they will engage in this simultaneous corruption once every 5 years or 2.5 years. So they are saying we will not change, we'll continue to do what we want to do because our incentives are like that. But it's just that why spend this money every year or every 2 years? We will do this in a very simultaneous way after 2.5 or 5 years. So I think if your problem is that parties are spending a lot of money, we need to fix that election expenditure problem through many other ways like ADR and other non-profits have been arguing for. But simultaneous elections is not a solution for that. It just means that 30,000 crores will be spent once in 5 years, and that too, because it's being spent in once in 5 years, maybe that 30,000 crores will become 40,000 crores. Who knows? Because you need to lure the people even more. So again, I don't think this is the argument to bat for simultaneous. At least it doesn't make the case very obvious to me. What do you think?
Yeah, for me, the political party spending is, that is a separate problem to fix. And probably we'll look at state funding of elections. Probably we'll look at some other, ideas that could come up if we think that we are spending too much on this election. And I don't know how these bonds that have just come, that have been making the news for all this time, I don't know how they will play out. But, that is also a cause for concern, I would say.
Right. Yeah,
And
exactly. Yeah. Maybe those are the things to look at, right? Like instead of this simultaneous election.
yeah. And lastly, the other thing that we're talking about is the amount of the forces that we need, the CAPF force that is needed to conduct these elections, to keep law and order in place during elections. Again, with that, I think that we should question, why do we need that much? What is it that we are doing wrong that we need so many security people to conduct simple elections? Right? So, what do you think about it?
Yeah, actually, out of all the reasons, this is the reason which I am probably somewhat sympathetic towards, right? So, just this movement of entire security forces, and remember, polling officials are actually people who are working in the government, right? So, this is like their part-time job, and they are forced into it. School teachers, government servants, they have to do this work. So, maybe there is some sense in the fact that their duties get diverted because of these elections. So yeah, probably that is an issue, but again, for that we should be thinking of, okay, then maybe we want to give this polling duties to someone else, maybe not to people who are teaching in schools, right? So maybe you can hire people for contract for a particular period of time. Election commission can be made responsible for that, whatever, right? There are other ways to tackle this, but that doesn't mean that you actually have simultaneous elections, because as we said, even if you do simultaneous elections in the way which is proposed, there will still be separate elections for local governments. There will still be state elections and Lok Sabha elections, which will be combined maybe after every 2.5 years. So you will still have multiple elections. It's just that you won't have them in an haphazard way, which they happen currently. But it will not sort of suddenly mean that your security forces are engaged just once in 5 years. That's not going to happen. So yeah, that's why I think there is some merit in this argument, but again, the solution doesn't lie necessarily in simultaneous elections, is what I feel. There was one more point, Suman. The Parliamentary Standing Committee has been considering this view, and one of their thing is that, see, frequent elections disrupt normal life. Frequent elections also perpetuate caste, religion, and communal issues, and that's why we should have simultaneous elections. So what do you think of this argument?
I think that is as absurd as it gets, because caste and all other things keep playing all through the time. And if you have it once, if you have it 5 times, it's still playing in the right. So I don't know. That's not reason enough to change the electoral structure.
Yeah, it's like saying that those are the problems, and by doing this simultaneously, these issues will go away, or they'll become less of a problem. I don't know, maybe people will actually cook these issues up near the elections, because they know it's going to happen only in once in 5 years, and they might actually go at a higher peak and crescendo because it's going to happen in such a planned way. So I don't think this is another argument for which we should have simultaneous elections necessarily.
Yeah. At this point, we should take a break, Pranay. We will come back for the rest of it. I'd like to just remind all our listeners that the Takshashila Institution runs public policy courses. The next cohort begins 7th of May. Applications for this are open. So please head on over to school.takshashila.org.in to apply for our courses. You can choose between advanced public policy, tech and policy, and defense and foreign affairs. So go over and do apply. The last date for application is 30th of April. We'll come back after the break.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Cyrus Says Cock and Bull, Cyrus, Ayushi, Shreyas, and Antarix talk about the IITIM Shadi.com endeavor and the newly conceived male contraceptive pills. We have a brand new show. It's a Marathi show called Akhand Bharat. Host Tanya Mane is an Indologist, and she takes us back to Vedic times and offers us the history and origin of many myths. On Paisa Vaisa, Anupam introduces us to Manesh Mahatme, Director Payments, WhatsApp India. Together, they map out the success of digital payments in India. On the Filter Coffee podcast, Karthik speaks to Shubham Nag. He's the creator of the community Tattoo Culture. On the Life Manifesto, Zarina shares how one can go about building a strong character with good value system. And on the Habit Coach, Ashton explains the subtle but important difference between listening and hearing. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Also, don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms you're listening to us on, including the one you're listening to us on now. And also, please do check us out on YouTube. We have a number of channels. They're all available on ivmpodcast.com/YouTube. We're also doing a small listener survey to help us understand you, the listener, better, and how you like our shows, how you respond to the advertising, and so on. We'd really appreciate it if you could spare a few minutes to fill it out. It's at ivmpodcast.com/survey. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors on the network this week: SBI Life Insurance, India Water Portal, and Jupiter, a digital banking app. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Welcome back. In this last part, we will discuss what the one nation, one election, simultaneous elections can mean for the structure of parliamentary democracy and for federalism as such. Okay, so Pranay, your views first. What did you think of it?
Yeah, so again, in this discussion paper itself, they have done a very good job of looking at the counter arguments on this point. And I am not an expert on this, but I just went through those arguments. So, what they say is there have been multiple studies by other organizations that look at elections closely, and they say that there is a correlation between a higher percentage of electoral wins for national parties as against regional parties whenever Lok Sabha and state assembly elections are held together. So basically, whenever this happens, there is at least a correlation that the national parties win over. Maybe because when people are voting at the same time, the concerns of the national concerns can override the state government concerns. So that is probably one reason. What this discussion paper argues is that correlation is not causation, so it's not necessarily a proven thing, and that's why simultaneous elections should be okay. Now my point is that the burden of proof actually lies with people who are proposing simultaneous elections to prove that actually there is no such correlation, and in fact it is perfectly fine, there is no causation, etc. That should be proven by people who want to change this policy, and I don't think we have enough data for that. At least prima facie we know there is definitely a correlation, so we need to tread with caution. Maybe there should be more studies, government should commission such studies and find out if that is the case. So that's my one concern. Second, there is also the big concern, right, that what happens when state governments falling before the completion of 5-year period, what happens when you have simultaneous elections, right? So again, the what this proposal says is that because you will have elections in, let's say, 2.5 years, you can probably mitigate some of those concerns, but there will be periods when you have caretaker governments, where you will have state governors taking in charge, etc. So which is again quite a bit of problem, right? They also propose that in order for this simultaneous election to work, you will also need to make sure that whenever you are having a no confidence motion, along with that you also have to bring a confidence motion to show that people on the opposite side of the aisle who are protesting against the current government also have the numbers. So they are saying that also should be done simultaneously. So I think those things are out of the scope of simultaneous elections, right? You will also have to make a whole lot of other changes in order to get this thing called simultaneous elections working, and the benefits for these are not obvious. The unintended consequences for these are perhaps huge. We don't know how it will affect the state government versus union government balance. We don't know how you will handle parties or governments which fall before the completion of the term. So I think there is again a lot of concern over why even do this when the benefits are not that obvious and costs are probably huge. So that was what my understanding was. What about you?
I mean, for me, this part of it was more disturbing than the earlier things that we discussed, because this fundamentally changes the nature of our democracy as such, in my opinion, because the founding principles are accountability of the legislature and the 5-year term. Now, when we are doing something like this, if you're fixing the term for 5 years, there is no way that a government that is anti-people can be, asked to go in between. At present, we have various, somebody can bring a no confidence motion against you, and the government can be booted out, and we can have new elections, and then the process of governance, representative governance, goes on. Whereas if you fix it to 5 years, and you are saying that if you don't have an alternate, that is, there is no confidence motion against the no confidence motion, you are handing over too many powers to the governor, who is again, you're centralizing things. Also, if a new government is elected, again, this paper proposes that they will be elected only for the remainder of the term, which is if there is only 1 year remaining for this government, then why would you elect another government for just the remaining 1 year, right? That is a little, it sounded a bit off for me. It goes against the 5-year term that we have set for ourselves. So there is a lot of these things that need to be sorted. And I think once this actually goes into play, there will be a lot of resistance from the legal community, be challenged on, I think the Momai judgment will come back into play, and the basic structure document also will come back into play. So this is going to be a long drawn process, etc. And like you said, we don't know the benefits that we are going to get out of this. So is it really worth the whole thing? That is my take on this.
Yeah, and I think see, the current PM, for example, is by without doubt probably one of the best campaigners in probably Indian electoral history. So maybe this government actually wants to bring this policy because you can utilize their best campaigner in a more efficient way, right? Which I understand that might be one of the reasons why they might be batting for it. But by the way, a lot of other political parties are also in favor. But this government has articulated its position in favor of one nation, one election many times. So what I would think is that yes, if you want your best campaigner to be available for this elections, maybe there are other ways possible, right? They have already tried this hologram thing, and now you're also having
Yeah, and it
remote
is for
meetings.
them to figure it out, right?
Yes, yeah,
why
and they
should
are experts at it. I mean, I'm sure they can figure out better ways so that the PM can give simultaneous speeches in 20 states, and that will happen. So the solution to this is a simultaneous deployment of your main campaigners' powers, not simultaneous elections.
That's true. Yeah. Any other closing thoughts? We can close this off.
No, that's also. I would like to know what our viewers think. Generally, this is a new idea that this discussion paper has proposed, and new ideas should always be given due credit because changing the status quo is always difficult. So, I think if people can go through this paper, maybe we could have another discussion and know what the pitfalls are. But overall, at least my sense after going through all this is that the benefits are too small, the costs are unseen, and even the seen cost appear too big for this move to happen at this stage. What do you think? How do you conclude?
I agree. Yeah, I agree, Pranay. I will link the discussion paper in the show notes here. Request all the listeners to do read all of this and read a few other papers few articles that I will link on this. And let's all have an informed opinion about how we want to go. Thank you. Thanks, Pranay. Thank you all for listening to us.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
जिस तरीके से हमारे माँ बाप ने अपने करियर की सीढ़ियाँ चढ़ी थी, वैसे आज के जमाने में तो पॉसिबल है ही नहीं गुरु, क्योंकि हमारा जमाना इतना कॉम्प्लिकेटेड है। आज क्या नहीं है, कंपटीशन है, सोशल मीडिया है, इतना इंफॉर्मेशन ओवरलोड है कि करियर का टेंशन ज्यादा होता है, उस पर काम कम। टेंशन लेने से कोई फायदा तो है नहीं। क्या करते हैं, ठंडे दिमाग से सुनते हैं प्रोबेशन से प्रमोशन तक पॉडकास्ट को हर सोमवार, जहाँ पे सिर्फ प्रैक्टिकल बातें होती हैं आपके करियर की। और कौन करता है वो? मैं आपका होस्ट अभिनव त्रिवेदी। ये पॉडकास्ट आप सुन सकते हैं IVM पॉडकास्ट की वेबसाइट, ऐप या फिर किसी भी अन्य पॉडकास्ट स्ट्रीमिंग प्लेटफॉर्म पर।
Ladies, I'm sure you will relate to it if I say that we are constantly busy with work, studies, cooking and what not. And amidst all of this, we often forget an important element that needs our desperate attention: finance. So here we are, bringing to you SBI Life presents A Sip of Finance, a women-exclusive podcast where we will teach you how to manage personal finances in a simple and straightforward way with your host, Priyanka Acharya, a finance expert who's been in the industry for 14 plus years. And not just in English, but in 7 more languages. So tune in every Tuesday for fresh episodes on the IVM Podcast Network and all major podcast streaming platforms.